Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be able to offer you a brief irony on the notorious South Slav question. The crisis of dualism in Austria-Hungary entered an acute phase in 1903 as a result of three developments. First of all, the demands of the Hungarian opposition for parity in language and insignia within the imperial and royal military escalated into national resistance against Austria and contributed to the electoral victory of the oppositional coalition in 1905, but simultaneously provoked national demands among the minority nationalities in Hungary. Secondly, the national movement in Croatia exploded into a wave of anti-Hungarian riots and seriously destabilized the regime of Ban Karol Kuenhedervári and his pro-unionist and Serb protégés. Three, the dynastic revolution in Serbia removed the pro-Austrian Obrenović dynasty in favor of an aggressively nationalistic, expansionist, and pro-Russian Karađorđević dynasty. As a result, the South Slavic question became the most dangerous threat to the security of the dual monarchy. In response to the South Slavic question, really the role of the predominantly South Slavic provinces in the dualist system, the Austro-Hungarian elites reacted variously. The dualist circles of Emperor King Franz Joseph II developed really no policy. The great Austrian circle of Archduke Franz Ferdinand extended a trialist bait to the South Slavs with the unlikely prospect that the circle's objections to the thoroughgoing dualism in the monarchy would be addressed by an even more decentralizing trialist system in which the South Slavs would gain the third unit, besides, of course, Austria and Hungary. Three, the Hungarian political elite was secretly gleeful over Austria's troubles in the Balkans, but maintained a myopic view that the South Slav grievances were nothing but an expression of Viennese schemes at the expense of Budapest. The circumstances promoted a new political initiative by the Croat political leaders that would argue against the old sterile policy of relying on Vienna against Budapest and maintaining a vigorous front against the pro-Hungarian Serb parties in Croatia, Slavonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the pro-Italian Serb party in Dalmatia. This new political initiative, or the new course, as it has been traditionally dubbed, commenced in 1905 under the leadership of two agile Croat notables, both from Dalmatia, journalist Frano Supila of Dubrovnik, the editor of the Fiume newspaper Novi List, and Ante Trumbić of Split, lawyer and politician, later the mayor of Split. Although both belonged to the Dalmatian branch of the Nationalist Party of Right, their Dalmatian background militated against the anti-Magyar odium of Croat nationalists in the Hungarian half of the dual monarchy. They promulgated the platform of the new course, which included some traditional Croat demands, for example, the revision of the unfavorable Croato-Hungarian agreement of 1868 and the acceptance of the Croatian financial independence, or failing this, at least the literal interpretation of the agreement of 1868. But also they offered some radical new demands. First of all, a crypto-trialistic proposal for the unification of Croatia, Slavonia with Dalmatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina based on Croato-Serb national oneness, national unity, and on the Croat state right, with an extended hand to the Slovenes, and then the idea of a common front against all the anti-German forces in Austria-Hungary, including the Hungarians and, of course, the Italians, under the slogans from the Alps to the Maritza on the defense against Germandom. In addition, reliance on Karađorđević Serbia and ultimately on Imperial Russia was among the unarticulated and secret strategic concepts of the new course, with the ultimate and subversive goal of a creation of a South Slav state, or Yugoslavia, with Serbia and Montenegro, needless to say, outside of Austria-Hungary. Supila and Trumbic scored initial successes in their designs. By the autumn of 1905, the rifts among most of the Croat oppositional parties in Croatia, Slavonia, and Dalmatia were healed, as were those between the Croat and Serb oppositional parties. By December of 1905, the Croato-Serb coalition developed as a junior partner to the oppositional Hungarian coalition, and then, on the wings of the Hungarian coalition's electoral victory in 1905, scored its own electoral victory in the 1906 balloting for the Croatian Sabor, or Diet. Still, just as Sándor Beckerle clipped the wings of the Hungarian coalition once it came to power, he worked a similar effect on the victorious Croato-Serb coalition by engrossing it in the permanent displays of loyalty against the specter of pan-Serbian grand treason. After the Young Turk Revolution, when Foreign Minister Ehrenthal precipitated an international crisis by pressing for the unilateral annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and after the triumphs of the Balkan states in the wars of 1912-1913, the real pan-Serbian grand treason could no longer be noticed for the crying of wolf in the intervenient years. By the time Princip fired his shots at Sarajevo, Supila and Trumbic were spent politicians, sufficiently alert to the dangers that were bound to follow by making a hasty retreat to Italy and from there to France and Britain. Under the new wartime circumstances, they placed themselves at the head of the South Slav emigres from Austria-Hungary and created a self-appointed Yugoslav committee that resurrected the secret program of the new course. No longer constrained by agreements with with Austria and Hungary, they opted for a union with Serbia and Montenegro, which they got in a most unwelcome Great Serbian form already during the course of the war. Even before Serbia's military collapse in 1915, the Serbian government declared in December of 1914 that, I quote, the unification and liberation of all of our unfree brethren, the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, of Austria-Hungary was one of its war aims. This did not prevent it from adjusting to the far more reduced Entente offers, which in the event of an Allied victory after the signing of the secret Treaty of London with Italy in April of 1915, would have secured for Serbia most of southern Bačka, Slavonia, and Dalmatia, and the whole of Bosnia-Herzegovina. Nor did it prevent it from seeking a separate peace with Austria-Hungary after the February Revolution in Russia. Still, sensing its weakness in July of 1917, the Serbian government signed an agreement with the Yugoslav Committee, the so-called Corfu Declaration, by which it bound itself to establish a united and independent Serb-Croat Slovene state that would be, I quote, constitutional, democratic, and parliamentary monarchy headed by the Karađorđević dynasty. Trumbic signed the declaration on behalf of the Yugoslav Committee. Supila, on the other hand, disenchanted by the policies of the Serbian government and convinced that Croatia was about to be partitioned between Italy and Serbia, departed from the Yugoslav Committee and created his own committee, which would promote the independence of Croatia to the Allies. Ignored and isolated, he died in London in 1917. In fact, the war results turned out a lot better for Serbia than its political leadership really anticipated. The Yugoslav Committee and the political leadership of the South Slavs in the monarchy were ignored by the victorious Allies, which failed to recognize the state of the Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs that emerged out of the rubble of the monarchy in October of 1918 on the territory of the monarchy's South Slav provinces. Unable to protect themselves against the Italian territorial claims, domestic turmoil, and the encroaching Serbian army, the monarchy's South Slav politicians, led by the liberal Croat political elite, caved into Serbia and concluded an agreement that brought forth a new state, ultimately called Yugoslavia, with all the features of a perversely read program of the new course. Croats and Slovenes were indeed rid of Austrian and Hungarian tutelage and retained most of their ethnic territories, though Italians temporarily gained Istria, Fiume, Zadar, and some of the Adriatic islands. But they got new masters, admittedly less formidable than the former, but certainly less committed to the rule of law and parliamentary procedure. Still, the wealth and security of the South Slavs could have been enhanced through evolutionary adjustments had not the results of the First World War created the conditions for the growth of communist and fascist totalitarianisms. The real tragedy of Yugoslavia was not what transpired under the various corrupt and arbitrary Great Serbian regimes in the 1920s and the early 1930s. The tragedy was that the occupation of 1941 put an end to the initial federalist measures, the Cvetković-Maček Agreement of 1939, that the demons unleashed in 1941 made a post-war democratic state impossible, and that Titoist federalism after the war and Titoist non-alignment were as fake as they were welcome by the West under the conditions of the Cold War. It was a tragedy of perversity and omission, just as banal as what transpired in Austria-Hungary. If we are to engage in counterfactual speculation, however, we must also consider what the South Slavic area would have looked like in the 1960s in the absence of the First World War, and presumably the Second as well, and in the absence of Yugoslavia. Pavle Ostović, a Croat from the Lika-Krbava county of Croatia proper, and the secretary of the Yugoslav Committee in London, wrote the following little piece in 1971. It's a long quote, and let me share it with you. Opatija, which is today Abacija, near Rijeka, Fiume, was in 1918 purely Croat. Then came the Italian schools, etc. In the summer of 1945, I went to Opatija to see what trace the Italians left behind. I walked the city streets and addressed the children. Elderly people did not interest me, always exclusively in Croatian language. They all answered my questions, they understood them, but not a single child answered in Croatian. They responded in Italian. That was their language, and what would have been the language of the country once they were of age. It follows from this that the well-conceived schools can change the character of a population within 2 generations. We like to brag that we withstood the threat of Germanization, Italianization, etc. That, in fact, is not true. We were protected by our backwardness, primitivism, illiteracy, and the fact that previously the means of rapid denationalization were not available, nor was anybody then particularly interested in such things. Nowadays, it is otherwise. Had the Italians kept Dalmatia only 50 years, there would be no more Croats there. In Vojvodina, the situation was similar. The elite, the educated people who went to Hungarian schools spoke Hungarian. Dr. Milan Čurčin, who was a Serb from Pančevo in the Banat, told me that had the liberation been deferred by 50 years, there would have been no Serbs in Vojvodina as well, end of quote. For the purpose of identification, I should add that Ostović was a lifelong friend of Ivan Meštrović and of the New Europe group, Robert William Seton Watson, Wickham Steed, and of course all the rest of the New Europe crowd. For them, in fact, the new course, triumphal or not, came not a moment too soon. Thank you very much.